The most surprisingly high-selling product worldwide isn't the iPhone nor Nike sneakers, but most likely India's generic drugs. When you mention Indian generic drugs, what comes to mind? You might remember the movie Dying to Survive, or low-cost generic versions like gefitinib and daclatosphere. But the reality is even more staggering. India is the world's third-largest pharmaceutical producer, but in the generic drug sector, it's the absolute leader. It produces over 60 billion generic pills annually, exporting to over 200 countries and regions and dominating 20% of the global generic market. On US pharmacy shelves, 4 out of every 4 generic drugs come from India. The total size of the Indian pharmaceutical industry is around $50 billion, with 70% of that value coming from generics. Its export value alone exceeds $25 billion, making it a vital supplier for patients around the world. Furthermore, India produces over 60,000 types of generic drugs, with over 4,000 varieties registered in the US market alone. It is also a major global vaccine supplier, accounting for 60% of world vaccine production. For infectious disease medicines like AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, Indian generics hold a market share of over 80% in low-income countries. The price disparity is breathtaking. The original drug to treat biscuit, a term likely referencing a type of cancer drug, can cost $1,000 per pill in the US, while the Indian generic version costs only $10, making it more than 90% cheaper. This difference is heart-stopping, and it is precisely these cabbage-priced, extremely cheap, life-saving medicines that have forcibly pulled countless global patients back from the brink of death. So why exactly is India the country that became the world's #1 in generic drugs? Although they're cheap, are these medicines truly reliable? The answer is not accidental. It is the result of a superposition of laws, talent, market, and historical opportunities, each link indispensable. To understand the Indian miracle, we need to go back to the 1950s. India had just shaken off British colonial rule, the country was poor and underdeveloped, medical resources were scarce, and the low-income population could barely afford medicine. The average life expectancy was only in the low 40s. At that time, drug prices were monopolized by Western multinational giants, making them an unreachable luxury for the poor. The issue of survival in India had become a social crisis. In the 1970s, Indira Gandhi took office, determined to solve the problem of drug accessibility for the people. India amended its patent law, recognizing only process patents and not product patents. Simply put, in other countries, once a new drug molecule is patented, you can't touch it for 20 years. In India, however, simply changing the manufacturing process was enough to legally produce a drug with the same efficacy. For India, this wasn't mere copying, it was a social survival strategy. Innovative drug development is long and expensive, and India couldn't afford the massive investment. Generics, conversely, have low costs and short cycles, allowing for rapid widespread use. This quickly enabled Indian pharmaceutical companies to become masters of reverse engineering. Once the original drug emerged, the Indian version could be launched within a few years. In 2005, India joined the WTO. International rules required the recognition of product patents, limiting the scope for generics. However, India cleverly introduced Article 3D, prohibited so-called evergreening, attempts to endlessly extend patent terms. European and American pharmaceutical companies like to extend patent protection by making minor adjustments to the formula, shape, or excipients. In India, this tactic doesn't work. The court can directly rule that it is not a new drug and therefore deny patent protection. This allowed India to comply with international rules while preserving a legal operational space for generics, which is seen as a gray area, skillfully protecting its domestic industry. At the same time, the Indian government established the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority to set maximum retail prices for common and essential medicines, and they also launched the Prime Minister's People's Pharmacy Program to provide low-cost generic names through government pharmacies, achieving a dual price guarantee. This ensures that regardless of income level, people can buy affordable medicines, and it created an institutional environment for the stable development of the generic industry. The success of Indian generics cannot be separated from its talent and industry infrastructure. India has world-class chemical and pharmaceutical talent, a vast number of local factories, strong large-scale production capacity, low labor costs, and relatively flexible regulation. This allows India to far exceed other developing countries in the speed of generic replication and cost control. As of 2024, India has around 3,000 pharmaceutical companies and 10,000 factories, with nearly 70% focusing on generic production, covering almost all common therapeutic areas, from antivirals to cancer drugs. From a technical standpoint, all drugs have a clear molecular formula and composition, like a recipe. The original drug pursues the ultimate molecular structure, efficacy, and safety, while the generic can be legally sold as long as it reaches a certain efficacy standard. Scientifically, the essential difference is that the original drug is the blockbuster movie, and the generic is the high-definition pirated copy. The regulatory requirement is bioequivalence, meaning the drug's concentration curve in the body must fall within the range of 80% to 125% of the original drug. For the vast majority of drugs, the feeling and efficacy when taken are almost the same, but for some narrow therapeutic window drugs, like anti-epileptics or immunosuppressants, even a slight difference in absorption can affect efficacy, so doctors are more cautious. Overall, Indian generics that receive FDA, US, and WHO certification are scientifically sound. What truly brought Indian generics global fame were the anti-AIDS drugs. Around the year 2000, AIDS was rampant in Africa, and the annual cost of cocktail therapy developed by Western pharmaceutical companies was as high as $12,000, something low-income countries simply could not afford. Indian companies offered to provide similarly effective drugs for just a few $100s. Hundreds of thousands of African patients gained a new lease of life because of this, establishing the global reputation of Indian generics. This not only cemented the image of Indian generics as equivalent to life-saving medicine, but also showed the international community the possibility of low-cost universal health care. Although Western giants protested patent infringement, they also realized India's low-cost production chain and huge market advantages, gradually choosing to cooperate with India, outsourcing parts of drug development, clinical trials, and production to the country. The US FDA has even recognized that some Indian factories meet international production standards, providing institutional support for the continued expansion of India's pharmaceutical industry. Of course, this is a double-edged sword and involves risks. In the early days, the quality of Indian generics was inconsistent, with some factories engaged in data fraud, inadequate hygiene, and chaotic management issues, leading to unstable efficacy and even risks to patients. In recent years, the Indian government has vigorously strengthened GMP certification, export audits, and international cooperation. The quality of medicines exported to Europe and the US is generally stable, although some lower-end products are still directed to low-income countries. Through long-term technical accumulation, standardized production, and international certification, Indian pharmaceutical companies have achieved a balance where generics are both economic and safe, but this balance requires continuous regulation, otherwise it could still turn into dangerous drugs. The global influence of Indian generics is not only reflected in price advantage, but also in public health strategy. For diseases like AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and cancer, the drugs supplied by Indian companies dominate the market in low-income countries. Anti-AIDS drug coverage in Africa reaches over 70% of patients, and tuberculosis drug coverage covers over 60% of patients worldwide. The domestic market of 1.3 billion people provides stable demand for Indian generics, and exports spreading globally form an enormous market scale. This superposition of laws, talent, historical opportunities, and market has turned India into the true pharmacy of the world. Of course, the shortcomings are obvious. Many upstream raw materials rely on imports, quality control is uneven, and investment in original drug research and development is low, accounting for less than 8% of sales, while major European and American pharmaceutical companies generally invest 15 to 20%. It is fair to say that India has perfected imitation, but is still some distance from original drug creation. In summary, the success of Indian generics is the result of a superposition of historical inevitability, institutional dividend, talent advantage, market scale, and international opportunity. They are cheap enough to save lives, but occasionally they can also fail. But when you only have a few banknotes left in your pocket, the last thing you can grab from the medicine cabinet is likely an Indian generic. What else do you know about Indian generics? Feel free to share in the comments. Finally, it's essential to remember that the low price of Indian generic drugs also comes with legal boundaries. While they may comply with local pharmaceutical regulations in India, in countries like the United States, any Indian generic drug imported without the approval of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is considered an illegal drug. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed our content, please don't hesitate to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next video.